Environmental justice across Virginia. The concept of environmental justice began as a movement in the 1980s due to the realization that a disproportionate number of polluting industries, power plants, and waste disposal areas were located near low-income or minority communities. The movement was set in place to ensure fair distribution of environmental burdens among all people regardless of their background. This diagram shows environmental justice as the intersection between equity, social justice, and environmental protection that can lead to a development conflict. One area of potential interest in the context of environmental justice is right in our own backyard. The UVA hospital and nearby heat plant, both located right on the corner. While the hospital is by definition a facility devoted to healing people, the consequences of its facility's locations and energy consumption have a negative impact on the surrounding area. The hospital generates an enormous amount of waste and consumes an enormous amount of energy, and the amount of street traffic it causes on roads that were not intended to handle heavy traffic flow significantly increases the CO2 emissions in the general vicinity. Right across the street, the UVA heat plant generates heat to be pumped to all buildings all over grounds by burning primarily natural gas. The facility's contributions to emissions are worsened by the fact that in colder months, when greater heat input is required, the plant often supplements the natural gas combustion with coal, releasing the foul byproducts containing nitrogen, sulfur, and mercury. Together, these two complexes create a hotspot for airborne pollutants whose effects cannot be ignored. The area surrounding the corner has a notably higher cancer risk than the national average. The heat plant is denoted by the blue circle in this visualization of the cancer risk in Charlottesville, with the red areas being in the 95th to 100th percentiles, and the orange and yellow areas in the 90th to 95th and the 80th to 90th percentiles respectively. This is likely due to higher concentration of contaminants in the air. As seen in this map, the area near and especially downwind of the heat plant has particulate matter of diameter 2.5 micrometers level in the 80th to 95th national percentiles. In a twist of tragic irony, the UVA hospital actually indirectly causes more people to fall ill because of the repercussions of its existence. Compounding this issue is the fact that the affected area is largely low-income neighborhood with a high minority population, so the groups suffering from the side effects of the location of the hospital and heat plant are less capable of paying for treatment at the hospital. These socioeconomic and environmental issues combine to create the perfect example of an environmental justice case in our own backyards. Our next areas of interest are the Virginia military bases. Specifically, we are looking at the Quantico Marine Corps Base and the Fort Hill Army Base. The people of Stafford County and Bowling Green are those mostly affected. These areas have the highest environmental justice indices in the state, according to the EPA EJ screen. This is because of relatively poor air quality from industry, munitions, ordnance testing, and other military-related activities, as well as hazardous waste disposal in nearby areas. These areas have high minority populations and poverty rates compared to the Virginia average, with the red areas being the highest quartile. The large red section is directly downstream of Fort A.P. Hill, and the racial distribution gets lower the farther west from the base. These bases put populations, in particular black communities, at increased risks of developing cancer and respiratory illnesses due to environmental problems associated with the military bases. The yellow and dark gray areas are in the 95th and 60th to 70th percentiles, respectively, compared to the national average of cancer risks. Again, all downstream of the base. Looking at Quantico, you can see a similar pattern. The highest density of African Americans is downstream and downwind of the base, coupled with an above-average occurrence of contamination sites compared to its lower population density. Overlaying the previous map of percent of black populations with this map of respiratory health index, you can see that the area is identical. We can conclude that the base is negatively impacted by the air quality of this area, but coincidentally, these bases do not report to the EPA. The burden of dealing with environmental issues does not fall on the bases which are causing them. Looking back in history, we can see that unless we actively work to change this pattern, it will continue. The birthplace of the environmental justice movement, Warren County, North Carolina, was where in 1978, PCB, a carcinogen, was dumped on the side of the road for 2 weeks, stretching for 240 miles. Warren County residents were primarily poor and black. 500 people participated in a 6-week protest against the construction of hazardous waste landfill. The landfill was still constructed. These protests were the first time African Americans had mobilized a national, broad-based group to oppose what they defined as environmental racism. Warren initiated a surge of research in distributive justice, but we see similar environmental justice trends occurring across our state and our nation still today. Studying this only takes us so far. How are we going to change our society so that the negative externalities of our consumer society no longer disproportionately impacts the low-income and minority populations?